I'm so much happier now that I'm dead. Technically missing. Soon to be presumed dead. Gone. Am I lying? Oblivious husband will be going to prison for my murder. Can you please stop doing this? This is a driving test. Hey guys, so this is day 16 of my quarantine vlogs, which, honestly, I felt like I must have been off somewhere, but I guess not. Makes sense. I think I've done 14 vlogs before this, so I'm not sure where the math went, but I'm pretty sure it all works out in the end. You know how those things go. But the point is that today I wanted to try something a little zesty, a little fun. And you notice behind me, you can actually see my bookshelf. I know, right now it looks like total trash. You can't hardly see any of my books on here. But my bookshelf actually goes all the way, to the top, all the way to the bottom, actually. Underneath, the shelves you can see here, I have, a bunch of boxes filled with books. And then I have, 2 to 3 boxes of books that I have from, moving from Coos Bay. I did show a couple of my books there, though eventually when I do actually get furniture for my room, and I know I talk about it a lot, it's a waiting game. It's all about saving money. You know how these things go. But once I actually get, a bookshelf in, I definitely want to do, a bookshelf tour or something like that. Really cool things that you see. And I thought that, since I'm experimenting with my channel, since I'm doing all this stuff, I really want to try to, sort of break into sort of, a couple booktube videos. And just, try that out. Because I want to find my niche, I want to find my genre in the series. And I will probably, I still want to, do Let's Plays occasionally. I still want to do the dramatic readings and the ukulele covers and everything else that I've been doing because it's fun and those are my hobbies. But I also want to branch out and see, what sort of stuff I can do. So, for today's episode, I want to try, let's do a book review. So, for the last couple of weeks, I have been listening to the audiobook version of Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. I had to think about that for a second. And I found it really enjoyable. So, I had never, really thought much about the book. I had heard about it, of course. But I never really thought about picking it up until I saw it on a Tumblr blog I follow. Let's see. Bent Out of Shape. It's part of the Nailbrook ARG. And so I'm thinking, I remember it sounding really edgy when somebody described it to me. And so I'm thinking, I'm an edgelord, so I gotta check it out. It was a thriller, and I'm not usually into, thrillers or crime dramas or any of that when it comes to books. So that was definitely a new genre for me to dip my toe in. That being said, I really enjoyed it. Plot synopsis-wise, we deal with 2 characters, Nick Dunn and Amy Dunn, and she has a middle name that she says all the time, but I can never remember what it is. So, Nick Dunn is a writer of some sorts, who I believe now worked as a professor at this college in some Midwestern, flyover state. I honestly don't remember where exactly it was, because it wasn't super important to the story. And Amy Dunn, who is his wife, who is also apparently a writer, though I believe she had been unemployed for most of, the duration of the novel. So, essentially, a lot of the time, so I'm stumbling over my words. The majority of the book really discusses their marriage and everything that leads up to it, and so it's separated into 3 different parts. So first part, really just the introduction. You're really sort of giving a perspective of Nick and Amy's life. And they go into, in depth about, the time in New York, about Nick moving back to the Midwest for his parents because his mom had passed away, his dad had Alzheimer's, and they really start to talk about the trouble in paradise. And immediately from the beginning, you get a sense of this sort of toxic relationship between them. Nick seems to be a bit self-centered, if we're being honest. He seems to be very focused on his life and how it affects him. And I definitely feel like he definitely doesn't put enough thought into Amy's feelings. Amy, on the other hand, seems very closed off, very distant, and very passive-aggressive. She, like, from the descriptions from both of them, it definitely feels like instead of explaining her issues or troubles with something, she simply just keeps it mute and kind of blames other people for the issues she has instead of trying to work constructively towards a mutual understanding. Often for the book, I definitely get the feeling that Amy doesn't wish to compromise, she wishes to be right, which definitely, as you know, you get more characterization throughout the book, definitely becomes more apparent. This is all fine and dandy until basically Amy finds out that Nick has been a bit of a hoe and has been cheating on her with, like, some young co-ed named Andy, who she describes lovingly as that slut and I think able Andy, which I feel is just more slut-shaming for her because obviously that's the only way you can really describe women. This is coming from... And I can definitely understand her having negative feelings about the other woman, but it definitely is a bit... It is definitely very telling how she describes her, just in general. And it's very explicit. There is many, many mentions of a lot of excruciating details about how much of a hoe she thinks Andy is, and how much a hoe she thinks her husband is. But we're going to, get onto that in a bit later in the video. So, she thinks, I could divorce his ass, I could, just walk in on them and embarrass them, or, take pictures and sell them to, a tabloid, or, do something that's, reasonable. But then she's like, I could do that, but what? And this might be minor spoilers, I did not read the back of the cover, because everyone has spoiled it for me already. So if you don't want spoilers, maybe stop watching this video. And she's like, but what if, hear me out, I framed my husband for murder! Excruciatingly. The first story arc in Fables. We do that, except instead of trying to get, out of a debt, I just framed my husband for murder because he a hoe. And I'm thinking, well, I applaud you for your innovativeness, very goal-oriented here, but maybe don't do that. That's a bit extreme, sweetie. And so, that's when the story starts to divide. On one half, you get the Ozark Amy, which I do love that naming convention that she uses throughout the book. It's very... I like the style. It's innovative. Because Amy talks a lot about her different personalities, about her different facades that she puts on. And so it's split between Amy being on the run, basically hiding because, she's supposed to be dead. And this gives you sort of a kind of Catch Me If You Can vibe, where it's all about hidden identity and how she, does everything very carefully, and sort of her just observations of it as from the outside. And then you have Nick, who's dealing with the crime side of it. He is being framed for her murder, and so he's dealing with a lot with the police investigations and with the media frenzy that stirs up over a dead chick and her, brooding husband. And so that's when it becomes really interesting. And you start to get really... Oh, that's my hand. You start to get really into just the depth of the characters. Finally, now, interestingly enough, and once again, this is minor spoilers, she actually shows up near the end of the book. They get back together, and you think, oh, that kind of sucks, but, maybe they're happy again. But simply just through everything that happens, everything that's been characterized, is just an amazing turn of pace that really just underlines the characters. And I'm trying to be as vague about that as possible, simply because I don't want to spoil it for you. There's just so much about the book that really, you need to see for yourself. You really need to read it and see it from the characters' perspectives to really just, I guess, experience the novel as well as you can. Now that I give you a brief summary, basically, chick frames her husband, then she stops framing her husband, but then, shenanigans. And so, let's get started with the characters. And I think, let's start with Amy, actually. Amy is probably one of the more interesting characters in the novel. When she starts off, you have this she's very interesting. And it's... so I'm having a hard time like finding my words. When you first hear it, she has this enthralling state to her, just how she describes things. But you can definitely tell, even from the beginning, how she phrases everything, that she has a very negative and jaded viewpoint in life. She talks about her parents, about how she's this miracle Sun King type child, and she immediately phrases it about how there's this unrealistic expectation for her because she was the one that lived. So she has to be perfect. She has to be this perfect person. Which I think is actually really interesting from a viewpoint of an only child, is that there is definitely, since you don't have these siblings to contrast with, there is, I do think, some sort of pressure to succeed, to have that perfectional state, because you're really the only one that can carry the torch. But at the same time, she views life in a very negative way. She often feels like a lot of her viewpoints are very vindictive. They have this very victim mentality that is other people against her, rather than them simply having their own actions, which are not tangentially connected to her life. And throughout the novel, she constantly complains and bemoans how people affect her and how they mistreat her simply by existing, basically. And so that is, one thing that really just underlines her character. She is very negative. Almost every single NPC that she describes in the novel is always very negatively phrased. She calls Andy, the other woman, a slut and a whore. She calls her husband a lot of things. I think even like that quote that I listed you, she called him, let's see, lazy, shiftless, shitty. Like she had like 5 different like negative phrases to describe him. And for a man who cheated on her, for betrayed her trust, that's reasonable. But when she describes every other person that she knows in those sort of same things, how she mocks the love that her parents share, how she insults random women and men, and for no reason, really. She describes a woman that she meets in this hotel, Greta, she describes her like very rudely. She demeans her looks, her personality, for no other reason, simply that she judges her. She demeans her landlord by poking fun of her "Hang in there" poster, by saying that she's one of those people who likes things unironically. And that some way means that it's insulting. She even insults people in the background for no other reason than she simply just has a negative viewpoint. So in the later scene when she's talking to one of her ex-boyfriends, who is one of the few characters that you can actually have a negative opinion on, because he has enough characterization to really deserve that. She describes, simply a group of old women who are playing in a bar as skeletal septuagenarians, which is honestly a bit rude, because early in the story part, she describes them as, she says, these men were expecting girls but only received golden girls, which I think is an interesting, turn of phrase. They were expecting, young, attractive women, but they instead found, older women. And I don't think the term golden girl could even necessarily would have a negative or even neutral aspect. I think most people love the Golden Girls. I mean, Betty White, who the fuck doesn't love that? If Betty White was singing karaoke, I'm just like, you get it, Quinn. Right? But describing a woman as a skeletal septuagenarian is beyond rude for no other reason than just really her jaded mindset. And this doesn't just apply to simply people in her periphery. She describes her friends, her co-workers, her family members, her spouse, every single person in her life. She does not have a single good word to say about it. She constantly demeans and insults people and her surroundings. And for a better word, she's, I would say, bitchy. Not in the sense that she has this shrewish, nagging persona to her, but in the sense that she constantly has this insulting and demeaning viewpoint against the whole world. She's a pessimist. And that's really only the start of her character. Besides being very pessimistic, being very jaded, she's also exceedingly narcissistic. She constantly wants people to see her as this amazing Amy. In one scene, Greta, one of the women she meets at this hotel, they're watching a news coverage of her, which she has been viewing religiously, which I honestly do not think is part of the narcissism. honestly, if I had, caused this media sensation, I would be following it. Because, I'm the type of person that wants to be caught up with the investigation. I think that from a criminal viewpoint, that's interesting. That makes sense for her character. And mostly just because I watch too much Criminal Minds. But then Greta is like, wow, she's okay for her age. And Greta has a very, let's say, lukewarm opinion of how hot Amy is. Not necessarily overtly insulting or degrading, simply, she's okay. And Amy, in protest, goes while Greta is in the bathroom, spits in her food, which I mentioned in the last vlog, but that still gets me. She literally does something demeaning and disgusting towards her for no other reason than that Greta had a bad opinion of a woman that she had never met. And yes, like I said before, you can say that maybe that's, a show on why, women tear each other down, that whole not like other girls phenomenon. But at the same time, Amy shows that she wants to be the best. And Nick even refers to that later on in the series. He says, I'm telling her what she wants to hear. If she hears me say that I'm wrong and that I want her back, she will believe it because basically she doesn't have a bullshit meter. She will believe it if you're complimenting her. She needs me to puff up her ego. And that's a bit of a paraphrase, but that's essentially the truth. She sees him say, I was wrong. I was a hoe. I want you back. Look at all this, stuff I love. And she's like, ooh boy, finally. Now I can, have that man I want. And it's definitely an interesting turn of phrase. And once again, spoilers. So stop watching this if you don't like spoilers. But it's interesting just because she does have this very narcissistic viewpoint. She wants to be the best. She wants to be this amazing Amy. She has this perfectionist quality to her. And as you, listen to the show, as you watch it, or listen to the show, watch it, as you, read the book, you come to realize that Amy is not simply a genius, I can't remember the name of the character, but the main protagonist from Catch Me If You Can, where he has all of these plans and all of these just cons. She is, more accurately, psychopathic. And I'm not a medical practitioner. I am not somebody who understands psychology. But I simply mean that in the sense that I hope that I use that term correctly or at least understandably. Is the idea that she does these things for her own ego, for her own satisfaction, and that she will hurt people, that she will destroy people's lives for no other reason than for either her benefit or to protect her own ego. Because it turns out that Nick is not the only person's life she has destroyed. In another scene, Nick interviews a old college boyfriend of hers, who I actually believe is Desi. I'm not quite sure there might have been a separate character. And it reveals that she actually... I'm trying to think how to describe this. Basically, he breaks up with her, he meets up with another chick, and in retaliation, Amy tries to get him convicted for rape. And it's really horrible to hear that. She concocts this extremely detailed, explicit scenario where he plans all of this evidence, orchestrates this to where he is going to be going to jail under a false accusation for sexual assault. And I think that's really interesting, especially, in, our climate, where we have dealt with the Me Too movement. We have dealt with, a lot of questions about rape culture and sexual assault and how these things affect, women and men and all of those other things. And I think it's really interesting that you would have that false accusation, where you do have that prejudice that it is guilty until proven innocent. And I don't say that to demean, the Me Too movement, or to say that we shouldn't do anything like that. But I do think it's interesting that her character does use that societal bias to frame this man. And they do mention that. They mention this bias where it is, the idea criminally that men are always the one that is hurting the woman. They mention this... I can't remember the name of the news reporter, but it's basically a Nancy Grace stand-in. And they mention this Nancy Grace effect where we're so societally conditioned to believe that if a woman is missing, that it is the husband's fault, that the husband murdered her. And Amy knows this. Amy has this understanding of society, and so she uses that societal bias to frame her husband for murder, to cause this media backlash against him, because she wants his own suffering as a satisfaction for his infidelity. And that's just really, first of all, fucked up, but also really interesting that there is that societal aspect to it. Another big theme in the story is the concept of the media. Both Nick and Amy are writers. They both have experience with it. Nick was a journalist at one point, and Amy did something pop culturally in writing. And so they both had this, experience with journalism. They both had the experience with, the media and how crime is reflected. One of the minor characters actually has a quote about that. He says that there's no such thing as a, let's say, unbiased jury now because of how social media and media in general deals with these murders. There's magazines, there's TV shows, so all of the jury members will have seen something. They will have these preconceived notions before they ever step into the court. That the case is already solved before they ever have a jury come together. And that's really interesting. They deal with the media circus so much in the book. From Nick's side, they discuss all of these talk shows, all of these different things, from blogs to paparazzi to everything that is dealing with his, he has to deal with this media circus because he hasn't killed his wife, but people don't know that. So everyone is accusing him and saying these terrible things. Everyone's getting their 5 minutes of fame, talking about how important Amy is in their life. And it's a fascinating look into it. You can definitely tell that Flynn definitely did a lot of research into how these things affected, and she definitely wanted to write a story that looked at a perspective from this Nancy Grace 50 minutes angle where it's all about sensationalism and murder and true crime. And that's really fascinating to have a thriller come from that angle, because we're so used to having these true crime, these docudramas, all this stuff from a very, I guess, removed sensation. It's simply one more story. It's simply a little bit more real than, NCIS or CSI or Criminal Minds or anything like that. So to have those aspects, to have them as a meta-narrative on top of this personal, crime that we've witnessed, it's fascinating. And I think, media and all that is a really interesting thing because it's changed so much over the years. It has been, with the advent of reality television and all of that, there's so much more to the sensationalism, how we deal with these tragedies. And so it's amazing how much that plays a part, how much it is part of, I guess, Amy's revenge. And her whole motivation is revenge. It is her wanting to destroy him. And it really, goes a lot into her motivation, her characterization, and everything else. And basically, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I can really discuss about it. Oh, another, one of the other main themes of the story was there is a sense of feminism throughout the book. And I'm not talking about the more SJW style of feminism, where they scream about the patriarchy and about every, man is an evil chauvinistic pig. Because honestly, I've never cared for that type of rhetoric, simply because I find it misandrist. And you can have your whole flame war roast in the comments there. But I actually do think that from a feminist perspective, Gone Girl is really interesting, and it does have a lot of interesting themes that deserve some discussion. Now, I've definitely seen some Gone Girl quotes and r/nice girls and stuff like that, because there is a lot of stuff which is really toxic from Amy's point of view. So, but let's just actually break into some of the quotes and monologues and things that she's described and really get into them. I guess the main thing is, let's discuss her whole cool girl description. And if you don't know what cool girl is, I don't have a quote with you because I'm woefully unprepared and this is my first video. But basically, I'm going to paraphrase it for you. Somewhere near the beginning of the book, Amy talked about how she first met Nick, and she had this persona as this cool girl, and that guys wanted the cool girls. And what a cool girl was basically this idealized male fantasy, according to her. Cool girls are basically the women that want to hang like one of the guys. They like to do masculine things. They want to, chug beer and watch sports, and they're fun and they're flirty, but they're also very tomboyish, and they have these masculine traits that men appreciate. They're not, they're basically the sort of rejection of hyperfeminization, I guess you could say. They're not extremely femme, but they have this. They're not particularly butch in the sense that they still have feminine expression, but they don't have necessarily the gender expression that is overtly feminine. They have more masculine traits that men like not being picky eaters or enjoying sports or drinking beer and that type of thing. And so she said that there's 100 different varieties, but that's basically what men want. And so she says that she was the cool girl because that's what society expected of her. And she was simply doing what society wanted. And that's what Nick liked. And she also puts up a really interesting claim that she was okay with this because she expected the world to change, for things to turn, for men to do sort of the same thing, to be these cool guys that women wanted, which I get, which from which she describes as sort of the sensitive guy, and that ideal. But she also, one point I do love is that she does mention the idea of, I guess, how she mentions guys' sexes, I guess, fetishization and homoeroticness between women. How she mentions, I was expecting, guys to, wear lipstick and play, lacrosse and, make out for our own amusement. I thought that was a really interesting point because there is that sort of stereotype that, in the whole, what is it, lesbian to graduation trope where there is this whole thing about women acting homoerotic for men's amusement. And I thought, criticisms like that were really interesting and actually had a place for discussion. But there's also this idea that all women are acting this way that men want and all that. And I think this, definitely stuff to a plaque, and I think there's definitely a conversation there. But she framed the whole thing from this perspective that men are basically pigs for wanting these traits in women, instead of, that simply being something that people like. And I'm not going to get too deep into that, but that is basically just her belief set. And so she wanted to be this cool girl, but when she realized that she hated that, and so she became more herself. She became more Amy. I think that's another really interesting thing, that she never really talks about what her real personality is throughout the book. She describes all these personas that she takes on, this Ozark Amy, this amazing Amy, this cool girl Amy, but she never really discusses what is herself, what she wants to be that makes her, actually Amy. And I think that's interesting. That was just an observation there. But throughout it, she also discusses, a lot of other things about feminism. And I can't really think of any other examples off the top of my head besides, that really explicit part about cool girls. But there are definitely a lot of themes about that. A lot about relationships and just the dynamics between men and women that are really interesting. That there's a lot of food for thought, but it's done in a very well way. Actually, I actually was doing a little bit of research, and Gillian Flynn mentions that one of the sort of things that she wanted to have, because she did want to have these feminist undertones, is that she did want Amy to be a antagonist. She didn't want her to be a negative character, because she disliked the idea of women always being seen in this very positive, in this very wholesome light. And I think that's really interesting because Amy does come off extremely negative and unsympathetic towards the end of the book. She becomes more of the antagonist, even though we initially rooted for her at the beginning of the book because, she got rid of her shitty husband and she's, being free and empowered. But as it goes on, you, see a lot of negatives. You see flaws in her character. And I think that's really interesting that you can have that depth while still having this negative association with a character. That you can still understand her while disliking her. And I'm glad that, she does have these flaws, that you don't have to like this woman who, is manipulative and overpowering. And so if I'm going to put, a pretty little quantifiable sticker on it, I'm probably going to rate Gone Girl 5 out of 5, which I hate starting off my first review with, such a praising endorsement, but I think it deserves it. When it comes to the writing, it's very well written. You have a lot of alliteration, a lot of really technical little frills in the writing that I enjoy. I like that it has a smooth pound to it. It has a really great pace. And it just works, like, from an audible and from a literary perspective in that sense. The characters are really in depth. At least the two main ones, the ones that that are narrating it. Some of the side characters like Go and the lawyer and Desi, they have enough characterization for the plot, but they don't focus on them. And I think that's okay for the story, because the story isn't about them. It's really, in the essence, about Nick and Amy's marriage. And I think that as thrillers go, it is fantastic because you get a lot of really in-depth meat to the story. You get the zesty, juicy bits that make it interesting. How she plans the frame up, everything she does, the media circus, and just a lot more of the psychological bits of it as well as you go into the third act of the book. And so the whole book itself has really good framing, really just good pacing, and it builds up well. There is tension to it, but there are also moments of, I guess, relaxation of release, which is important for any book. You have that interest curve. And so from a pacing perspective, it does really well as well. Overall, I think Gone Girl is a really well constructed book. It has a lot of really interesting ideas in it. It has really interesting characters. And I'm actually really enjoying it, because a lot of thrillers, I'm always just expecting, oh no, the terrorists blew up some building and there's a conspiracy. And I don't always enjoy that as much. Some of my least favorite books that I've read have been thrillers, like Michael Crichton's Red Dawn. I did not enjoy it. It felt dull, I wasn't interested, because it wasn't character driven, it was action driven. But Flynn managed to have a just really in-depth and interesting set of characters who worked against each other, and there was so much conflict and fighting that was just amazingly powerful because of how the characters were written and how their perspective really showed you the world. And so if you're into books that are character driven, if you're into books that are about how the characters interact with each other, Gone Girl is definitely your thing. If you like thrillers and crime dramas and stuff like that, that's definitely your thing. But if you're more about action and I guess people beating each other up and stuff like that, it's not that type of thriller. And I'm not really good at giving you suggestions of these types of things, because if I like a book, I'll read it, but if I don't, I won't. So it's the mileage may vary type stuff. I think it's definitely worth its hype, but I also think that there's a lot of people out there that idolize Amy in a way that they really shouldn't. And I think it's sort of the same thing with characters like the Joker or a lot of other more psychopathic characters. So for instance, how the whole nice guy trope where they think that the Joker is the best character ever, or they're obsessed with Rorschach from Watch Dogs. I feel the same way that there's a lot of this nice girl mentality where they see Amy as this sort of empowered person instead of a very manipulative negative character. And so I think that if you understand if you can see the depth and the reasons why Amy is not amazing, that she has these flaws to her, then you can definitely get a lot of mileage out of the story. But if you think that Amy is this great depiction of feminism and what women should be, then I think you've definitely missed something in the reading. Anyway, guys, that's me, False Bullsies 123. Just that cishet Mel telling how it is about what women want and feminism or whatever. So roast me in the comments, because I'm not allowed to have an opinion. And just thanks for listening. I know a lot of the themes in here were probably maybe a bit edgy. I know a lot of people, but remember, this is in 2014. Nobody wants to hear SJW and anti-SJW discourse on YouTube, because if I was, I would still be listening to Chris Ray Gun and Anita Sarkeesian hate videos. But anyway, guys, tell me what you thought about this review. It was something that was new to me, and I had a lot of fun filming it. And it's definitely something I want to try more in the future. Because if you can see past here, I got a fuck ton of books and you can't really see like a lot of them, but they go pretty far back. And I just want to start digging into it. And like I love books. I am a very avid reader, and I haven't really read much like since I've been going to college. But that's definitely something that I wouldn't mind getting back into. It's been a big part of my life. It was a big part of my childhood, and so that's definitely something that I want to share with you guys. It's something that I have a lot of passionate and interesting words that I can spew out of my mouth hole for you. Anyway, guys, I hope you're enjoying this week, enjoying all the fun stuff I've been showing you. And I just want you to have a great day, okay? Anyway, trailing on, talking too much, false bulls, 1, 2, 3, signing off.